Hey guys, tonight we're going to travel back in time, way back, to the year 1372. The stars are out, the air smells faintly of manure and chimney smoke, and you've just woken up with the unmistakable throb of a toothache. That's right. Not a paper cut. Not a stubbed toe. A toothache. And not in 2025 with dental clinics on every corner. No. This is the year of mud roads, chamber pots, and surgical practices that are equal parts guesswork and trauma. You're lying on a straw-stuffed mattress in a one-room cottage that leaks when it rains. You rub your jaw, hoping it's just a passing ache, but the dull throb intensifies like a drumbeat of doom. Congratulations. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up. The room is dark, save for the low flicker of embers in the hearth. A sleeping goat snorts in the corner, and your spouse mumbles something that might be Latin or just medieval snoring. Your mouth tastes like old cheese wrapped in despair, and the pain pulses with each heartbeat. It starts in your molar, sharp, persistent, and radiates upward, curling into your temple like a snake. You poke the sore spot with your tongue. Big mistake. The pain jolts so hard it actually wakes up the chicken roosting above the lintel. There is no toothpaste. There is no dentist. There is no Tylenol. The best you can do is chew a clove if you have one. And considering your income is 1.5 eggs per day, cloves are as mythical to you as unicorns. You try to sleep. You can't. The pain has now entered its dramatic phase. Waves of fiery stabs mixed with dull, bone-deep pressure. The kind of pain that makes you question your life choices or your sins. And this is where things take a turn, because in 1372, pain isn't just physical, it's moral. Toothaches aren't just considered a health issue. They're seen as signs, messages, judgments. Somewhere, someone's probably whispering that you didn't pray hard enough. Or maybe you stared too long at old Marjorie's ankles last Lent. The rooster crows, utterly unsympathetic. You rise and shuffle outside. It's muddy, it's cold, and the village is just waking up. People nod at you. Well, half nod. They're mostly toothless. You're clutching your jaw like it's a fragile relic. The baker's apprentice passes by and winces in solidarity. He lost 3 teeth last spring. Infection. The village priest said it was punishment for gluttony. The poor boy had only eaten 2 sweet buns. Historians still argue whether medieval clergy really believed toothaches were divine punishment, or if it was just a convenient way to moralize everyday suffering. At this point, you're desperate. You hear that old Bera, the herb woman who lives by the river, has something for pain. You trudge through the muck, mouth throbbing, breath fogging the cold air. Bera greets you with a toothless grin and a brew that smells like it once belonged in a horse's armpit. She offers you a poultice made from goose fat and powdered bark. You nod, because anything is better than this. She applies it. It burns. You cry. She says that's a good sign. You limp back home, half frozen and 80% skeptical. But maybe it helps. Or maybe it's just placebo and mud. Either way, you make it to mid-morning before the pain returns like a vengeful bard with a new ballad. And now, people start suggesting the barber. You've seen the barber surgeon before. He cut off old Tom's gangrenous toe last year with something that looked suspiciously like garden shears. He also pulls teeth, or rather, yanks them out with the enthusiasm of someone opening beer bottles at a tavern. You hesitate, but you don't really have options. The pain is winning. You can't chew. You can't think. You can barely swear properly. As you drag yourself toward the village center, you catch sight of the blacksmith's assistant. He gestures toward your swollen cheek and says, "That looks bad." You want to respond, but opening your mouth makes you whimper, so you just nod. You pass by the church, and for a moment, you consider ducking inside, not to pray, but to hide. Maybe you could just wait it out. Maybe it'll stop on its own. You remember that one guy whose tooth just fell out, and then he was fine. Until he died 2 weeks later. But still, that 1 week must have been peaceful. Unfortunately, your molar has other plans. It feels like it's growing horns. You taste blood. You nearly faint. You reach the barber's shop. He's outside, sharpening something on a stone that screeches like it's filing down souls. He smiles when he sees you and says, "Ah, tooth trouble?" Like he's greeting an old friend, not prepping for amateur maxillofacial warfare. You nod. He invites you in. You step inside. The smell hits first. Stale herbs, sweat, and what might be. Is that old meat? There's a stool, a bucket, a stained apron. You sit. He rolls up his sleeves. You wonder if he's washed his hands this year. Probably not. You open your mouth. You regret everything. You sit there, trying to steady your breath, but the air smells like boiled leather and disappointment. The barber surgeon hums to himself as he rummages through a wooden chest that looks suspiciously like it once held cabbages, or possibly a severed foot. You hear the clatter of metal, then a long pause, then more clatter. He finally pulls out what looks like a pair of rusty pliers and holds them up with a grin like he's just selected a fine wine. "Don't worry," he says cheerfully. "Used these just yesterday. Worked a treat." That could mean the tooth came out, or the patient did. Let's talk about hygiene, or rather, the absolute absence of it. In 1372, the concept of brushing your teeth is about as well known as intergalactic space travel. People have a vague sense that mouths should smell less like something died in them, but the tools for achieving that are creative. If you're lucky, you've got a chew stick, a twig from an aromatic tree like neem or mastic. You chew one end until it frays, then rub it on your teeth and hope the wood understands dentistry. Some folks use crushed eggshells or ground oyster shells. Others dab on charcoal or ashes, because nothing says minty freshness like the remains of last night's fire. If you're especially fancy or slightly unhinged, you might gargle with wine. Not to clean your mouth, mind you, just to feel something. Historians still debate whether medieval people truly believed in any kind of oral hygiene regimen, or if they simply hoped no one would notice their breath smelled like fermented despair. But make no mistake, your breath in 1372 could knock over a donkey. And toothpaste? Forget it. If anything, people might rub their gums with salt or vinegar, or in rare cases with stale urine. Yes, you heard that right. In a world where almost everything was recycled, including personal shame, urine was considered medicinal, and you thought flossing was a chore. Back in the barber's chair, if we can call it that, it's really just a stool with a stain that's seen too much. You're told to bite down on a leather strap, not for anesthesia. Oh no, there is no anesthesia. This is just to give you something to destroy with your jaw before the jaw gets destroyed for you. Your face is slick with sweat. The barber lifts the pliers. Let's pause, because even though this is happening to you, it's worth noting that barbers weren't just cutting hair back then. No, in medieval Europe, The barber surgeon was your one-stop shop for everything from bloodletting to amputations. Need your head shaved and your abscess drained? One man, one blade, zero formal training. There was even a barber's pole, yes, the red and white spiral thing, that symbolized the blood and bandages of their trade. Makes your neighborhood supercuts seem suddenly sterile. You clench your fists. The barber puts one hand on your forehead, tilts your head back, and wedges the pliers deep into your mouth. You try not to scream. You fail. There's a yank. Then another. The pain is electric, white-hot, and blinding. You see stars. You hear angels. Or maybe just the blacksmith hammering next door. Your soul briefly leaves your body and says, "Nope." But the tooth doesn't come out cleanly. Of course not. It's cracked, brittle. The barber mutters something that might be Latin, or might just be a swear. He twists the pliers again. Suddenly you feel a pop, a gush of something warm, maybe blood, maybe pus, maybe both. The pain is momentarily replaced by a strange hollowness, like your face forgot something important. The barber grins, holding up a fragment of tooth like it's a trophy. "Got most of it," he says. Most. You stagger out into the daylight like a war veteran. Your mouth is full of gauze, or old linen, or sheep wool, honestly. Who knows? Everything tastes like rust. Your jaw is throbbing. But the pain is different. Less sharp, more dull, possibly even survivable. A neighbor walks past, sees the blood on your chin and says, "Tooth?" You nod. He pats your shoulder in solidarity and whispers, "Try elder bark next time." You go home, collapse on the bed, and drift into a woozy sleep. You dream of flying pliers and sentient molars that chase you through fog. When you wake, your cheek is the size of a small apple. Your eye barely opens. You've developed a lovely infection. This is your life now. But before we descend further into swelling and sepsis, let's rewind. Not everyone trusted the barber. In fact, there were entire groups of people who viewed him as a necessary evil. Some preferred to just tough it out. Others tried home remedies. Some even believed toothaches were a punishment from God for impure thoughts, gossip, or not fasting properly. And some believed demons caused it. Specifically, the toothworm, a mythical creature thought to burrow into your teeth and gnaw from within. People thought if you could just smoke it out or scream loud enough, the worm would leave. Historians still argue whether this was purely folklore or a misunderstood observation of exposed dental pulp writhing under heat. Either way, 0 out of 10 dentists recommend. Meanwhile, upper-class folks, yes, even in 1372 there was a class divide in dental misery, had slightly better options. They could afford imported spices, better food, and the occasional clean cloth. But they also gorged on sugar when they could, which meant their teeth fell out just as fast. Nothing says nobility like gold thread in your cloak and black sludge on your gums. And so, your day continues, swollen, broken, but technically alive. You've earned a break. You even think the pain is fading a bit. It isn't. But you tell yourself that, because sometimes hope is the only painkiller available. You wake again around dusk, dazed and sticky with sweat. Your pillow, if we can call that bundle of straw and desperation a pillow, is damp with drool, blood, and the vague imprint of regret. Your jaw feels like it's been attacked by a vengeful squirrel, and when you sit up, your head swims. There's a metallic tang in your mouth. like you've been chewing on old armor. You shuffle to the basin and spit. The water turns pink. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howls. You try not to take it personally. You've survived the initial extraction attempt. Sort of. But here's the kicker. Medieval barber surgeons rarely removed the entire tooth. More often than not, they just pulled the visible bit. The root? Still lodged somewhere in your gums, planning its revenge. Your neighbor stops by with what he calls a healing broth, which smells like boiled grass and possibly sadness. You try a sip. It's warm. That's the nicest thing you can say about it. But your face still aches and swelling is increasing, which means, you guessed it, you're probably due for another visit. But this time, the barber suggests you come back in the morning when the light is better. That's when he offers his full procedure, which you immediately suspect involves new levels of agony and possibly the use of livestock restraints. So let's talk more about that experience. You arrive just after dawn because nothing says spa day like surgical trauma with the sunrise. The barber's assistant greets you by handing you a wooden stick to bite on. You ask what it's for. He simply says, "You'll see." Inside, the barber has set up a small bench and has already laid out his tools: pliers, a curved iron probe, a bone chisel, and, why not, a tiny mallet. They look like they belong in a blacksmith's pouch or possibly a medieval escape room. Barber surgeons didn't use anesthesia. That's not even the bad news. The bad news is they believed pain was part of the healing process. Pain was a sign your body was working, that the evil humors were exiting, that your soul was being purified through sheer agony. So if you screamed, good. That meant it was working. Now, let's address the setting. The room isn't sterile. The concept of germs won't be discovered for centuries. The floor is dirt, the walls are timber, and the air is thick with smoke from the fire where tools are cleaned, i.e., waved through a flame and declared good enough. The table you lie on still has bloodstains from last week's ear operation. Or was it an elbow? Historians disagree. The barber approaches, probe in hand. He starts by poking around in your gum line, searching for what he calls the root of the devil. You scream. He nods approvingly. "There it is," he says, as though locating a rare truffle. Then comes the hook. Literally. A hooked tool is jammed into your inflamed socket and twisted, because of course nothing soothes swelling like torque. You feel a crunch, a pop, a flash of something bright behind your eyes. And then the blood. Not the tasteful Hollywood trickle. We're talking biblical levels. The barber pats your shoulder. "Bleeding's good," he says, like he's commenting on your lawn. You start to black out. He sprinkles something that smells like moldy mint into the wound, possibly sage, possibly mouse dust. It stings. You howl again. Outside, a chicken clucks in alarm. This, apparently, is the second phase of medieval dentistry. If the first didn't finish you off, the second almost certainly will. Still, people came. They had no other option. In a world where oral pain could last for months or years, some were willing to roll the dice on barbaric tools wielded by a man whose main qualification was owning a knife. The barber finally steps back, examining his work. Your mouth feels cavernous, numb, but also like it's humming with leftover lightning. You touch your cheek. It's hot and tight. Infection is almost guaranteed, but congratulations. You survived the procedure. Now here's the quirky part. After a tooth was removed, some barber surgeons offered tooth replacement. Not functional replacements, mind you. Just aesthetics. They might carve a small ivory or wooden piece and tie it in with wire. Imagine biting into a crusty loaf and leaving your wooden tooth behind in the middle. Classy. And speaking of materials, let's appreciate the range. Some replacement teeth were made from cowbone. Others used metal. There's a documented case from the 14th century of a knight with a brass molar who allegedly claimed it helped with chewing and God's favor. Historians still argue whether he was being sincere or just very concussed. If you were rich, you might even be offered gold dental work. But don't get too excited. Gold was soft, and fillings or caps tended to fall out during hearty meals or bouts of loud laughter. Being wealthy didn't mean being spared. It just meant your suffering glittered more. You're sent home again, newly hollowed. The barber tells you to rinse your mouth with warm ale or water infused with sage, thyme, or vinegar. Depending on his mood or how much he likes you, he might throw in a prayer or two. The swelling will get worse before it gets better. You'll eat thin porridge for the next week. You'll avoid singing, laughing, or breathing too hard. But at least that one tooth is out. Of course, there's that other molar on the opposite side that's starting to ache. But let's pretend you didn't notice. You're back in your hovel, slumped in a corner like a sack of regret. Your mouth feels like it's been used in a knife-throwing competition, badly. Every pulse in your jaw is a small explosion. You're spitting out blood-tinged saliva into a clay bowl that used to hold cabbage stew. Frankly, it's an upgrade. But now that you've had the full barber-surgeon experience, let's take a closer look at that wonderful collection of tools he used. And by wonderful, we mean, what fresh medieval hell is this? First up, the dental pelican. It's a lovely name, isn't it? Almost poetic. You picture a bird gliding across the water. Instead, you get a curved metal lever designed to gouge a tooth from its socket. Its beak-like shape earned it the name. Its results earned it screams. The pelican is jammed between gum and tooth, twisted forcefully, and, if all goes to plan, the tooth pops out. If not, well, there's always tomorrow. Then there's the tooth key, a horrifying little device that looks like someone crossbred a wine opener with an instrument of confession. You'd hook it around the offending tooth and twist. Ideally, the tooth came out. Less ideally, it broke in half. Least ideally, your jaw followed. Barber surgeons also had iron spikes, bone chisels, and occasionally leech jars, because if bleeding didn't happen naturally, they'd help it along. Medieval dentistry was all about options, bad ones, but options nonetheless. And if you thought sterilization was part of the process, oh no. Tools might be wiped with a cloth. They might be heated briefly in fire. But more often, they were reused with all the crusty gunk still clinging lovingly to their surfaces. Shared instruments weren't just for cost saving. They were for community building, in the sense that everyone got the same infection. Historians still argue whether barber surgeons genuinely believed they were helping, or if they were just winging it with terrifying enthusiasm. Probably a bit of both. Now let's talk ambiance. These procedures didn't happen in private offices or quiet rooms with music playing. No, extractions happened in open-air markets, on wooden benches, often in front of curious onlookers, sometimes even during fairs. Imagine, you're buying a turnip and suddenly hear someone shrieking from the next stall over. You look up. Yep, it's old Bert, getting his molar yanked while kids watch and cheer like it's puppet theater. In fact, some barbers turned tooth pulling into performances. They wore bright clothing, shouted to gather crowds, and promised to cure all pains of the jaw. They'd wave pliers dramatically, call their patients brave warriors, and after pulling the tooth, hold it up like a trophy. The evil is gone, they'd declare. Applause, cheers, occasional fainting. Did it work? Sometimes. Enough to keep people coming. Enough that you're now lying here, mouth throbbing, wondering if you should have just taken your chances with the worm theory. And speaking of aftercare, remember that lovely sensation of warmth spreading through your cheek? That's probably suppuration, infection. Your body has no antibiotics, no antiseptics, no antibacterial mouthwash. What it has is hope, and sometimes honey. That's right, honey. Not just for your morning porridge. It was one of the few things used in medieval times with actual antibacterial properties, though no one understood why. They just knew wounds treated with honey sometimes festered less. So yes, you might end up with a gob of sticky gold jammed into your gum. Tasty and traumatic. Another popular treatment was cauterization. Yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. Heat a metal rod until it's red hot, then apply it directly to the wound. Burn away the infection, they said. Burn away your will to live, you replied silently while trying not to scream through your gauze. At this point, you're wondering, why didn't people just let the tooth rot out? Well, many did. But some teeth, particularly molars, don't fall out. They fester, they abscess, they turn your face into a swollen balloon of pus and pain. That's when people cracked and begged for relief, no matter how brutal. And then there's the bloodletting argument. Some barber surgeons believed that a toothache wasn't a mouth problem at all. It was an imbalance of humors. You know, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. So clearly, the solution was to cut open a vein and let some blood flow out, or use leeches, or stick a hot iron to your temple, because why treat the source when you can just drain your soul through your elbow? There's even evidence some poor souls had holes drilled in their skulls to release pressure, not always for toothaches, but still. Medieval medicine was the Swiss Army knife of suffering. And yet, some of it worked. Not because it was based on good science, but because the human body is surprisingly resilient. People survived, sometimes healed, and even came back for more. Maybe that's the wildest part of all. You shift on your bedding, clutching your jaw. Someone outside is singing a harvest tune, off-key but comforting. You try to hum along. Sharp pain shoots down your tongue. Never mind. Tomorrow, someone might offer you a fresh poultice made from boiled sage and ox bile, or tell you to rub your cheek with a dead toad under a full moon. You won't even blink. You'll try anything. Because here in 1372, pain is a way of life. Teeth are ticking time bombs. And the barber surgeon? He's the guy with the only wire cutters in town. Morning arrives with all the subtlety of a cow in a pantry. The rooster belts out its war cry. You groan and sit up, clutching your jaw like it's a relic that needs safeguarding. The swelling hasn't gone down. If anything, your cheek now resembles a rising loaf of bread, warm, puffy, possibly sentient. You drag yourself to the hearth and try to sip some thin broth. It tastes like wet wood and sadness. It dribbles from the corner of your mouth, which no longer fully closes. Congratulations, you've entered the next stage of dental misery, social suspicion. You see, in 1372, having a physical affliction wasn't just unlucky, it was also potentially spiritual. If you had a toothache that lingered, swelled, or oozed strange fluids, you might not just be sick, you might be cursed, or worse, punished. You step outside, and old Widow Maggs gives you the side eye. She crosses herself and mutters something about the mark. This isn't paranoia. It's social science, medieval edition. Because if your jaw looked like that, people assumed one of three things. You were hiding a sin. You'd consorted with demons. You had leprosy. And toothache, believe it or not, was sometimes lumped in with leprosy's early signs, especially if it came with facial swelling, lesions, or bone pain. The church taught that disease was often divine punishment for moral failings. So, a raging molar. That might be God's way of saying, stop coveting your neighbor's turnip pie. In fact, some clergymen considered persistent pain a blessing in disguise, a chance to suffer and grow spiritually. One chronicler wrote that tooth pain was a cleansing fire for the tongue's misdeeds. You, meanwhile, are too busy whimpering into your scarf to feel purified. Historians still argue whether this link between dental pain and sin was widespread doctrine or just a village-level rumor mill running on goat milk and speculation. But to the average person, sickness and spirituality were inseparable. You stagger toward the church, hoping for help, or at least a quiet corner to sit and not die in. Father Edric meets you at the door, eyes narrowing at the sight of your swollen face. He ushers you in, not quite touching you, and leads you toward a side chapel, where the sick usually wait. You're not entirely sure if this is an act of compassion or containment. He offers a prayer, sprinkles holy water, which you strongly suspect came from the same basin you saw a rat bathe in last week, and gives you a candle. Place it under the statue of Saint Apollonia, he says. Ah, yes, Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of toothaches, burned alive in the 3rd century after having her teeth smashed out by angry Romans. She became the go-to intercessor for dental pain. Want relief? Light a candle. Say a prayer. Hope she likes you. You do as instructed, watching the tiny flame dance in the shadowy alcove. You whisper your plea. Please make the pain stop. Please don't let this turn into a jaw abscess. Please don't let Mags tell everyone you're cursed. When you leave, a boy throws a rock at you and shouts, "Witch face!" You consider chasing him, but realize you'd probably collapse by the 2nd step. Also, you might actually look like a witch right now. Back home, you pull a woolen cloth over your head to hide the swelling. It doesn't help. Your neighbor Beatrix stops by with a handful of herbs and a whispered suggestion. Maybe someone hexed you. Toothaches in the Middle Ages weren't just seen through a medical lens. They were woven into superstition and folklore. People whispered about night spirits that entered the mouth while you slept, gnawing at your teeth like tiny goblins. Some believed a toothache meant you had offended a fairy. Others blamed elves, ghosts, or the wandering souls of angry relatives. A popular remedy? Sleeping with a piece of iron under your pillow, or tying garlic to your bedpost, or drawing a symbol on your cheek with lamb's blood. Nothing says dental hygiene like minor blood rituals. But there was also the matter of sin-eating, a folk practice in some regions where an outcast or beggar would symbolically consume the sins of the dead by eating bread and salt over a corpse. People feared these sin-eaters carried a contagious darkness. If one brushed past you, and your tooth ached soon after, that wasn't coincidence. That was spiritual blowback. Of course, these weren't mainstream Christian practices. They lurked in the cracks between church doctrine and local folklore. But for you, they might as well be gospel. Because no one's offering antibiotics, just sage smoke and judgment. That night, someone leaves a bundle at your door. Lavender, rosemary, and a carved charm shaped like a tooth. It's meant to ward off the toothworm. You place it under your bed. You're not sure you believe in worms anymore, but you believe in trying everything. You sleep poorly. The wind whistles through the wooden slats. Your dreams are strange, filled with whispering voices and a heavy weight pressing down on your chest. You wake with a start, heart pounding, pain roaring. Just another night in 1372, where God, gossip, and gum disease walk hand in hand. You wake at dawn, again, and this time your pillow is damp with something thicker than drool. You lift your hand to your cheek and it comes away sticky. It's pus, warm, yellowish, possibly alive. Your mouth smells like betrayal, and your tongue can't decide whether to explore the swollen pocket of doom or retreat to the safety of your molars. You are now officially in abscess territory. This isn't just a toothache anymore. This is a festering battlefield. You hobble to the door, sunlight stabbing your eyes. You try to smile at the neighbor fetching water, but the lopsided result makes her drop her bucket. Children point and giggle. One calls you Gristleface. You are now a village legend. Congratulations. But hey, there's hope. You hear that Brother Alwyn at the nearby monastery might help. Word is, he knows about potions. Also, he once brought a lamb back from the brink of death. You're not a lamb, but you're starting to bleat from the pain, so it's close enough. You shuffle along the dirt path. Bees hum nearby. You pass the old mill, where a man once died from a tooth infection that reached his eye socket. They say he smiled all the way to the grave. Historians still debate whether that was irony or rigor mortis. You reach the abbey gate. It creaks open. Brother Alwyn appears in the doorway, calm as a statue and wearing a robe that might have once been white. He peers at your face, nods sagely, and ushers you inside. Monasteries, in 1372, were some of the few places where medical knowledge and herb craft were preserved and practiced. While their understanding of anatomy wasn't great, and let's be honest, heavily filtered through theology, monks were often the most skilled healers around. They wrote herbal treatises, kept medicinal gardens, and brewed concoctions that ranged from mildly helpful to you'll hallucinate colors that don't exist. Brother Alwyn seats you on a stool, examines your cheek, and murmurs something about hot phlegm in the humors. He doesn't flinch at the smell, which is impressive since you can barely handle it. He dips a cloth in warm vinegar, presses it to your jaw, and you shriek like a banshee. Good, he says. The devil is stirring. He starts mixing a poultice from dried mint, thyme, and what might be crushed beetles. You want to ask, but you're afraid the answer will make it worse. He binds the mixture in linen and presses it firmly to your cheek. The heat seeps in. You can't tell if it's working or if your brain is simply trying to escape through your eye socket. Herbal medicine in the Middle Ages was a mix of actual botany, trial and error, and a dash of superstition. Mint was used to cool the blood. Thyme was for purification. Rue, sage, and marjoram were popular too. And yes, sometimes they used burnt turnip or badger fat. The line between cure and curse was thin and extremely flammable. You sip a tincture he hands you. It tastes like sour wine mixed with mushrooms. You promptly gag. He pats your back and whispers a prayer to Saint Apollonia again. She's getting a lot of attention this week. You're told to rest in a cot near the herb racks. The smell is overwhelming but oddly soothing. You drift into a feverish sleep, dreaming of monks pulling teeth with vines and bees whispering Latin in your ear. You wake later to chanting. The monks are in evening prayer. One of them passes by and hands you a lump of hardened resin. Chew gently, he says. You obey. It's bitter, sticky, and weirdly numbing. You learn later it was mastic, a resin from a Mediterranean tree, used for centuries to clean teeth and freshen breath. It's probably the best thing that's entered your mouth in days. As the sun sets, Brother Alwyn returns and examines your jaw. He frowns. "We must open it," he says gently. You panic. "Just a lance," he adds, holding up what looks like a small, sharp stick. And here we arrive at the medieval version of oral surgery. When an abscess became too swollen, the pressure had to be relieved. Otherwise, it could spread to the neck, the brain, or the bloodstream. The medical term for that is "you die." So they would lance it. No anesthetic, no sterile gloves, just a steady hand and a bit of cloth to bite down on. You brace yourself. You've lived through the barber's pliers. You've smelled boiled beetles. You've earned this. The stick pierces your gum with a small wet pop. Warmth floods your mouth. The pain recedes in a rolling wave. For a moment, you feel weightless. You don't even mind the taste. Okay, you do. It's like spoiled broth and iron nails. But the pressure's gone. You don't want to die anymore. That's progress. Brother Alwyn rinses your mouth with warm salt water and wraps your face in fresh linen. "Stay 2 nights," he says. "No talking. No salted meat." You nod, almost weep with gratitude, and collapse back onto the cot. The next day, your swelling has gone down a little. The other monks smile at you cautiously. One of them places a fresh bundle of thyme and marigold by your bed. You rest, grateful for this brief moment of medieval healthcare that doesn't involve screaming in a marketplace. You're not healed, but you're not dying. And here in 1372, that's basically a miracle. You wake with something like clarity. Not full health, of course. Let's not get carried away. But the thudding, blinding pain has dulled to a manageable roar. Your jaw still feels like it's been worked over with a blacksmith's tongs, but you can swallow without tears, and even touch your cheek without yelping. Progress. The monks are bustling around, their robes rustling, their sandals whispering over the flagstones. Brother Alwyn gives you a nod of approval as he hands you a clay cup filled with an herby-smelling brew. You sip it cautiously. It tastes like wet moss marinated in regret, but it warms your chest. Monastic medicine is a strange blend of the practical and the poetic. On one hand, the monks copy medical texts, cultivate herb gardens, and experiment with salves that occasionally work. On the other, they chant over your wounds and assign ailments to imbalances in the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. There's no germ theory, no bacteria, no idea that toothaches might come from decay and not divine rebuke. Still, there's comfort in this world of soft voices and scented rooms. You're even beginning to appreciate the garden, where lavender and chamomile wave gently in the breeze. You limp among the beds, pressing mint leaves to your nose. It smells clean, sharp, almost like toothpaste, if you knew what that was. Brother Alwyn shows you a manuscript, pages filled with precise drawings of herbs and descriptions in Latin. Some of it's helpful, some not so much. One remedy for toothache involves mixing hare's brains and oil of lilies. Another calls for boiling a frog until soft and applying the broth to the jaw. You try not to laugh because it still hurts, but the frog one almost gets you. "Has it worked?" you ask, or rather mumble through your puffy face. Alwyn shrugs. "Once, but that might have been coincidence." That right there, peak medieval medicine. Was it science, divine intervention, or blind luck? Historians still argue whether monks believed in the cause-effect of these treatments or simply repeated what had been written for centuries without question. Still, many remedies did contain ingredients with genuine healing properties. Willow bark, for instance, contains salicin, a natural pain reliever, and sage, mint, and fennel have antibacterial effects. But alongside these, you'll also find recipes involving snail slime, roasted onion, and, yes, occasionally human urine. Medieval pharmacology was a grab bag of the brilliant and the bizarre. By midday, Alwyn offers to show you how some of the treatments are made. You watch him grind dried herbs with a mortar and pestle made from stone so worn it looks almost soft. He adds vinegar, honey, and a pinch of some red powder that smells faintly metallic. "Dragon's blood," he says with a wink. You raise a brow. "From a tree," he clarifies, a bit too late. He wraps the mixture in linen and sets it aside. "For the next unfortunate soul," he says. "There's always one." You think back to the barber's crude forceps, the bleeding bucket, the audience of wide-eyed children. And here a monk is tying a cloth with gentle hands, whispering prayers over dried mint. It's the same time period, the same affliction, but two entirely different worlds. Still, even monks have their limits. "If your infection worsens again," Alwyn says solemnly, "they might have to cauterize. Heat the iron," he says casually, "and press it against the swelling to draw the sickness out." You nod slowly, already deciding that if it comes to that, you'll just walk into the sea. Later, you're given a treat, a poultice steeped in wine. It stings when applied, but the astringency numbs your jaw nicely. And the scent isn't half bad either. Certainly better than that dried mousefoot Beatrix tried to give you last week. You spend the evening in quiet observation, watching the monks chant as the sky dims. Candles flicker. The smell of rosemary and beeswax hangs in the air. Your head feels clearer. You can even chew a bit of bread, albeit very slowly, on the non-cursed side of your mouth. And then you learn something fascinating. One of the monks, Brother Cadric, confesses over dinner that he used to work as a barber surgeon before joining the order. You nearly choke on your turnip. He laughs. "I once pulled 3 teeth from a drunken lord who tried to pay me with a chicken and a poem," he says. "I took the chicken." He goes on to describe how some wealthier towns had guilds of barber surgeons, actual groups with apprenticeships and tools and procedures. He even mentions that in some places, like Paris or Bologna, real physicians did exist who studied human anatomy with something approaching science. But most people couldn't afford those luxuries, so they got whoever had the guts and a sharp implement. Monks, though, they were the quiet healers. Not always more effective, but certainly more gentle. And their cures were often the result of centuries of written trial and error, even if those records sometimes included questionable ingredients like bear grease or powdered emerald. That night you sleep better. Your face still aches, but it no longer feels like it's plotting your demise. You're bandaged, poulticed, and mildly wine-flavored. Life is looking up. You dream of herbs growing under moonlight, of monks humming lullabies, of frogs hopping into cauldrons and emerging as glowing, pain-free souls. And somewhere, not too far from you, another poor soul is waking up with a familiar throb behind the molars. It begins again. You leave the monastery with a jaw still tender, wrapped in linen that smells faintly of sage, and whatever that red powder was. Brother Alwyn hands you a small bundle of herbs for the road, mint, thyme, and marigold, and gives you a parting smile that is either encouraging or pitying. You're not sure which, and you're too tired to ask. Your walk home is slower than usual. Every step jars your head just enough to remind you that healing in 1372 is really just a long, quiet negotiation with pain. The village comes into view, and you brace yourself for questions, stares, and unsolicited advice. You don't even make it to your door before you're stopped by old Rita, the local wise woman. She's 80 if she's a day, smells like onions and smoke, and is surrounded by cats that may or may not be legally hers. She eyes your bandaged face and tuts dramatically. "Did they lance it?" she asks before you even greet her. You nod. She clicks her tongue. "Too early. Should have let it ripen." Ripen? You try to walk past. She grabs your arm with a grip like iron tongs and insists you try her remedy next time. She lists the ingredients off like she's reading a family recipe. Crushed beetles, a splash of sour ale, 3 ashes from a burned slipper, and this one, she says in a whisper, the dew from a dog's nose at dawn. You thank her with a nervous laugh and escape as fast as your sore jaw allows. Welcome to the world of home remedies, where desperation and superstition do a 2-person dance over the smoldering ashes of science. In 1372, nearly every household had its own version of a cure for toothache, passed down from great-grandmothers or made up during long winters when logic froze along with the potatoes. Let's run through a few real crowd pleasers. Burnt bread crusts, mixed with vinegar and applied to the cheek. Goat dung, dried and ground, wrapped in linen, placed over the swollen area. Spiderwebs soaked in wine, because apparently nightmares weren't bad enough. And yes, more than one manuscript recommends placing a dead mouse in the mouth. That one doesn't even try to hide its madness. Historians still argue whether these folk remedies were born of honest trial and error, or just the medieval equivalent of, well, I had it lying around. Some of the ingredients do have marginal antiseptic or numbing properties, garlic, vinegar, certain resins. But most of it, bold choices at best. You try to eat a soft mash of lentils and overcooked barley for dinner. It's bland, safe, and miserable. You chew on one side, trying not to let your tongue drift into the still healing abyss on the other. You're starting to understand why so many peasants just accepted tooth loss as inevitable. In fact, some people pulled their own teeth. That's right. DIY dentistry wasn't just a last resort. It was a badge of grim, gap-toothed honor. A strong rope, a heavy door, and a willingness to scream into the void, and voila, no more molar. Your cousin once did it. He now only eats mush and speaks in whistles. But hey, he's not in pain. As night falls, your neighbor Beatrix stops by. She's brought you a gift, a small clay amulet in the shape of a smiling tooth. Hang it over your bed, she says, to keep the ache spirits out. You smile as best you can and nod, because in 1372, politeness is survival. Later, alone in bed, you lie there thinking about how many strange things have entered your mouth in the past week. Beetles, vinegar, poultices, wine-logged herbs, and whatever that mastic thing was. It's like your jaw has hosted a medieval cooking contest, and all the entries lost. You think about the remedies you didn't try, like the one where you hold a black rooster under your chin at sunrise while reciting a prayer backward, or the one involving hot wax poured near the ear, or depending on which county you lived in, sitting in a graveyard at midnight while chanting to St. Blasius. Let's be clear, no one was mocking your pain. These were desperate people living in desperate times. When science hasn't arrived yet and superstition is free, any pattern that even slightly works becomes sacred. And it's not just the poor who do it. The rich had their own bizarre treatments. Some believed toothaches could be cured by rubbing jewels on the gums, rubies for inflammation, emeralds for abscesses, diamonds if you wanted to show off while drooling in public. Of course, most of this had little to no effect, but wealth could at least buy distraction, musicians, wine, silk pillows, and maybe someone to hold your hand while you bled into a golden basin. You fall asleep thinking about that mouse in the mouth again. You really wish you hadn't. In your dreams, your teeth fall out one by one, each turning into a tiny beetle that flies away, muttering in Latin. You wake with a start. Your jaw still hurts, but it's not worse. And here, that's a victory. The days pass, and while the throbbing in your jaw still shows up for roll call every morning, it's more of a grumble than a scream now. You can walk around the village without too many people gasping, pointing, or blessing themselves. Your face is returning to its usual shape, somewhere between peasant with opinions and seasoned cabbage taster. And yet, beneath your healing gum line, you feel a strange texture, a little hollow, a slight sting when you press down. You poke your tongue around and realize with horror, someone's tried to fill your tooth. This is not a metaphor. You make your way to the blacksmith. Yes, the blacksmith, who also sometimes helps with tooth repairs for those who can't afford a real barber or a monk. He looks in your mouth with a frown and says, looks like someone packed it. Packed what exactly? You spit into a wooden bowl, and he pulls out a tiny curved pick. Stay still, he mutters. You obey, mostly because your nerves are too stunned to protest. With a few pokes, he pulls out a dark lump. Metal. You gag. He grins. Pewter, I think. Maybe a bit of lead. Yes, welcome to the early days of dental fillings. See, in 1372, if someone had the tools, the money, and the stubbornness, they might try to patch a cavity instead of yanking the whole tooth out. But here's the kicker. Materials used for these fillings included lead, tin, copper, or combinations thereof. And what do all of those have in common? That's right, toxicity. Historians still argue whether these early fillings were actual repairs or simply aesthetic plugs to make the mouth look whole. Regardless, if you had one, it was likely hammered into the hole like a nail into a rotting fence post. So now, not only were you in pain, you were heavy metal poisoned. There's even documentation of people chewing on beeswax or resin to temporarily block a cavity, especially if the exposed tooth pulp made cold air feel like a dagger. You didn't fix the rot. You just muffled it and hoped for the best. Some rich folk even had gold leaf layered over broken teeth, not for function, just for flair. Gold teeth meant power, or money, or vanity, or possibly just a bad bet with a drunk court jester. The blacksmith sighs and hands you a warm cloth. Clean it out, he says. Could try plugging it with wool soaked in wine. That's what the miller's boy did. You nod, then remember nodding hurts, and stop immediately. So there you are, back home, sitting by the fire with a mug of something fermented and a sore spot in your jaw where some brave fool attempted dental innovation. You run your tongue over the spot again. It tastes like regret and recycled pewter tankards. You think back to stories you've heard. A knight who had a tooth replaced with a carved sliver of horn. A nun who used pitch from pine trees to seal a molar. A merchant who claimed to have chewed with a silver peg for 7 years. That last one probably died with his eyes glowing. These experiments weren't necessarily common, but they weren't mythical either. People were clever, desperate, willing to try anything to make the pain go away, even if it meant putting lead in their mouths and calling it progress. Of course, there was no X-ray, no drilling, no sanitation, just judgment calls made by candlelight and hope that the plug would hold long enough to make it through winter. One fringe case recorded in an obscure monastic ledger tells of a man who had a gemstone placed in his tooth to block evil humors. Whether he died fabulously or foamed at the mouth and collapsed into his soup remains a mystery, but you can't help but admire the commitment. You try to distract yourself. There's a traveling tinker in town, banging on pots and telling tales for coin. You shuffle over, hoping the noise will drown out the phantom pain. He tells a story about a queen who had her decayed tooth removed by candlelight and replaced with a pearl. She smiled like the moon, he says, and never chewed meat again. You give him half a turnip and a nod of solidarity. That night, in the flicker of firelight, you try to plug the little hole with chewed linen dipped in strong wine. It's not comfortable, but it's less bad than it was. And less bad is the medieval standard of excellence. As you lie down, you think of your options. Yank it out, risk an abscess again, leave it alone, hope it doesn't get worse. Try stuffing it with tree sap and wool. Very on brand for the era. You close your eyes and whisper a quiet thanks to Saint Apollonia, patroness of dental doom. The pain isn't gone, but it's managed, for now. You sleep with your mouth slightly open, tongue curled protectively, and dream of a future where toothbrushes exist, cavities are preventable, and dentists don't double as barbers and butchers. The days have taken on a rhythm now, a slow march of cautious chewing, cautious speaking, and cautious hope. Your jaw's less swollen. You can manage a smile again, though it's still a bit crooked, like a badly drawn map of France. People stop flinching when they look at you, which is always encouraging. You've almost forgotten how bad the pain was. Almost. But just as you begin to feel semi-human again, a chill wind sweeps through the village. The air changes. So do the whispers. Someone's cousin's nephew is coughing up blood. Another man has boils the size of pigeon eggs. And now, no one's really worried about your teeth anymore. Because the plague is back. Ah yes, the Black Death. In 1372, Europe is still trembling from its recent visits. While the most cataclysmic wave struck in the 1340s, bubonic plague doesn't just go away. It lingers. It returns in waves. It festers in ports and villages like a cruel landlord who forgot their keys but remembered their wrath. Suddenly, dental care, if you can call anything you've endured so far care, becomes even less of a priority. If your jaw's only rotting a little, congratulations. You've got bigger things to worry about now, like pustules, fever, and your neighbor Beatrix nailing herbs above your door to keep the death fog out. People start avoiding the barber's stall, not because he's bad at his job, he is, but because he's been handling too many sick people. He's switched from pulling teeth to lancing buboes, and his tools smell worse than usual. You'd rather face another abscess than whatever he's marinating in. Still, the odd irony is this. Some people with toothaches actually fare better during plague outbreaks. Why? Because in some towns, the worst infected are left to die quickly, while those with manageable ailments, like a sore jaw, are kept away from the sick. Pain becomes protection. Congratulations again. Of course, this only works if your body doesn't betray you. Plague doesn't care that your mouth already hurts. It doesn't care about your prayers, your poultices, or the rosemary bundles tied to your belt. It's a blind beast, fast, fatal, and highly fashionable among fleas. And dental hygiene, never a strong suit in the 14th century, collapses even further under the weight of mass death. Monks stop treating infected villagers. Herbalists close their doors. Nuns retreat into their own chapels. You're on your own again. You consider visiting the tanner. He's got strong liquor used for softening hides. Maybe a sip will numb your jaw. Maybe it'll kill something unwanted. Maybe you'll forget the name of your own goat. At this point, all options are valid. Historians still argue whether outbreaks of the plague truly reset medical priorities or just froze them. What's certain is that many basic health practices disappeared for a time. Fewer clean bandages, fewer herbs available, and a lot more people resorting to folklore rather than common sense. For instance, some people begin burning rue and juniper in their homes, not to purify the air, but to drive out the demon of rot. If you sneeze, someone might say you've startled the spirit of decay. You're pretty sure you just inhaled smoke and lint. Meanwhile, rumors spread about plague immunity linked to bad breath. Yes, that's real. The idea being, if your breath could kill a crow, it might scare the plague away. So people stop brushing entirely. Not that they really did before, but now it's officially strategic. Even worse, some believe that tooth pain is an early sign of impending plague. If you have one sore molar, better prepare for full-body collapse. You try to hide your healing face when anyone looks your way. Beatrix corners you with a cloth full of what she swears is a pestilence preventative. It smells like garlic, goose grease, and something that once lived in a bog. You take it anyway. It's rude to decline plague snacks. You learn of a family on the far side of the village whose youngest boy lost all his teeth in a week. Just fell out, one by one. No pain, just blood and silence. He died 2 days later. Was it plague? Or just terrible luck? No one knows. No one wants to find out. At night, you try to sleep. You lie still, listening to the wind in the eaves, the distant sound of coughing, the nervous whispering of people who've started burning their old clothes. You touch your jaw again. It still aches when you press, but the heat is gone. The pressure's gone. It's healing. But even if your mouth recovers, your trust in it never quite will. Because now you know, really know, what happens when it turns against you. The sleepless nights, the agony, the desperate superstitions, the risk of fire pokers in the face. And now, as people start dying again in small, staggered clusters, you see what the real dental priorities are. Don't die, and if you do, keep your teeth together long enough to be buried with a full smile. There's a weird, dark joke going around. At least if the plague gets you, you won't feel your tooth anymore. It's not funny, but people still laugh. Laughter in 1372 is often a shield, dulled and bent, but useful. Like everything else. You drift off with a damp cloth on your cheek and rosemary tucked under your pillow. Tomorrow might bring fever, or it might bring bread. You're not sure which is scarier. You survive the week. That in itself feels like a small miracle. The plague has passed your house like a shadow that lost interest. No black spots, no high fever, no collapsing neighbors. At least, not your neighbors. The village baker wasn't so lucky. People say he died mid-sentence while reciting the price of rye. But even as the panic ebbs, Your jaw gives you a new reason to worry. It's not pain exactly. It's more of a pressure, a deep, uncomfortable tightness along your lower jaw. You prod it in front of the firelight, rubbing your fingers along the bone, and you feel something off. Your jaw clicks when you yawn. It aches when you chew anything more ambitious than boiled barley. And worst of all, when you wake up, there's a new kind of stiffness in your neck. Not the slept funny on a sack of straw kind. The your body is sending warning letters kind. It doesn't take long for Beatrix to offer her unfiltered opinion. "That's jaw rot," she says, eyes wide, as if naming it might summon it like a tooth fairy with a grudge. You blink. "Oh yes," she goes on. "Had an uncle whose jaw rotted right out of his face. He sneezed and a molar hit the wall." Comforting. This time, you don't go to the barber or the monk. You go to old Mags, the village gossip-turned-apothecary, who seems to be the only person with consistent access to both dried herbs and unrestricted opinions. She listens to your complaint, feels your jaw with knobby fingers, and offers her diagnosis. That tooth left behind a grudge. What follows is a regimen of strange compresses, warm bread crust soaked in honey and vinegar, a paste made of ground radish, and something that involves the ashes of a burned walnut shell. You're not sure what any of it's supposed to do, but the warm bread smells amazing, and that's enough to get you halfway to belief. The truth is, jaw infections in the medieval era could and did turn fatal. What starts as a small abscess can spread to the mandibular bone, triggering necrosis and eventually leading to death by sepsis, osteomyelitis, or, less scientifically, face falling off. Historians still debate whether chronic jaw pain in recorded medieval cases was accurately recognized or dismissed as general malaise. Records are vague, often written by clergy with little medical vocabulary and lots of theological detours. What we do know is this. If your infection spreads to the bone in 1372, your odds of surviving are slim, and your quality of life is reduced to walking ouch. You recall hearing about a man from the next village who had a jaw infection that traveled downward, eventually causing swelling so intense it crushed his airway. His final words were, reportedly, "Tell the cow she can have the bucket." The human body can be poetic, even in despair. Back in your cottage, you attempt to examine your mouth using a polished metal plate as a mirror. All you manage to see is a haunted blur of skin, stubble, and dried mint. Still, you do your best. You gargle with warm wine. You apply compresses. You avoid hard foods, loud songs, and anyone trying to tell you, "You look better today," which is just peasant code for, "You still look like death, but we're being polite." Eventually, the swelling retreats. Your jaw no longer throbs when touched, only complains. You take it as a sign that you've escaped the worst, again. And just when you're ready to celebrate with a hearty stew, another village tale reaches your ears. It's about a woman in the mountains who, unable to eat from jaw pain, had her entire lower mandible removed by a local healer using a fish scaling knife and prayers. She lived for 5 more years, nourished entirely by soup and righteous anger. You suddenly feel very grateful for your half-functional molars and slightly crooked smile. One evening, as the fire crackles and your supper simmers, you take stock of your experience. Your mouth is not what it used to be. It clicks, it creaks, your smile tilts, but it's your face, and it still works. And in a time when many people died from splinters, it feels like a small, defiant victory. You realize you now chew differently. slower, wiser, as if every bite carries the ghost of the tooth you lost. You begin to notice how many people around you are toothless or close to it. Peasants with gums like polished stone, elders whose laughs whistle. Even the blacksmith, once a portrait of strength, now avoids hard bread like it's cursed. You ask old Mags if this is normal. She nods. Teeth are meant to leave you, she says. The only question is whether they take you with them. You add that to your growing book of medieval wisdom, right between don't eat anything that smells like it's judging you and never trust a goat named Benedict. And so you carry on, jaw mostly intact, spirit battered but not broken, and with a whole new appreciation for the terrifying complexity of the human face. The next morning greets you with birdsong, the smell of wood smoke, and, somehow, the faintest tingle in your other molar. You freeze mid-chew. Not again. You poke the spot with your tongue. It responds with the gentle whisper of an oncoming storm. You take a deep breath and pretend you didn't feel it. That has worked before, occasionally. But as the day goes on, the ache becomes a presence. Not a scream, not even a whimper. Just a tap on the shoulder from your own anatomy reminding you, hey, I could ruin your life again whenever I want. You tell no one. You wrap a scarf around your jaw preemptively, not for warmth, for dignity. This time, you consider your options. The barber's still in town, boasting about a new technique involving twine and gravity. The monk is reportedly treating a goat with foot rot. Old Mags is currently banned from 3 households for suggesting rat-tail poultices. And frankly, you're out of patience. But just when you think you're condemned to suffer in silence, a new twist arrives. A legal complaint. Apparently, the blacksmith, yes, that blacksmith, filed a grievance with the village reeve, claiming that your face, during the height of your swelling, frightened his youngest son so badly that the boy now refuses to eat anything not mashed by angels. You're being accused of causing psychological harm via dental distress. That's right. Toothache-related conflict has entered the world of law, and while it might sound absurd, medieval Europe had its share of legal entanglements over personal injury and disturbance of the peace, a phrase broad enough to include everything from public drunkenness to screaming too loudly during a molar extraction in the market square. Historians still argue whether laws relating specifically to tooth injuries existed, or whether they were folded into broader categories of assault, blasphemy, or witchcraft. But we do have surviving records of lawsuits that involve teeth, usually missing ones. For example, if you punched someone and knocked out a tooth, you could be fined. If you insulted someone and it caused them to lose a tooth, say, by sheer force of shock, you could be fined. And if you claimed someone hexed your teeth into falling out, and that claim hurt their reputation, lawsuit. In some towns, missing teeth became evidence in trials. In one legendary case, a baker was accused of theft, and a missing tooth print on a half-eaten pie was used to identify him. He denied everything until a molar-shaped chunk was matched to the edge of his grin. Justice in 1372 was inventive, if nothing else. You're called before the reeve, a leathery man who looks like he's never smiled once in his entire life, and asked to explain your role in the emotional destabilization of a child. You try to keep a straight face. It's difficult. You can't open your mouth all the way. Eventually, after a short testimony, and the blacksmith's insistence that his son now screams at cheese wheels, the reeve dismisses the case. Tooth pain is punishment enough, he he mutters, clearly speaking from experience. You walk out a free, slightly embarrassed peasant. That night, over a lukewarm bowl of millet, you reflect on how teeth are taken seriously, not medically, but socially. A broken tooth? You're seen as cursed. Too many missing teeth? You're dismissed as weak, or worse, as an omen. Even the nobility weren't immune. King Richard II, just a toddler in 1372, would grow up to inherit not just a crown, but chronic dental issues according to whispered records. His cooks eventually mashed everything, and it became fashionable for courtiers to pretend they preferred soft food. Even royal pride bows to jaw pain. Meanwhile, in some guilds, tooth condition determined rank. Blacksmiths, tanners, even coopers were expected to maintain a strong bite. Why? Because damaged teeth were a sign of poor health, poor hygiene, or poor blood. The irony, of course, is that strong teeth were mostly genetic luck. If you were born with thick enamel, spaced molars, and parents who didn't boil sweets in every stew, you had a chance. The rest of the population just prayed and gurgled wine. You, for the moment, have become that person, the one people stop to ask, was it the left side or the right? You've joined the unspoken club of survivors, each with their own dental war story. Your molar still twinges. You crush some mint leaves in your palm and chew them slowly, hoping to convince the tooth you're paying attention this time. Mint is calming, and somewhere in the monastery garden, Brother Alwyn would probably approve. At the very least, your breath smells better than it has in weeks. As you rinse your mouth with warm beer, because water's not safe, obviously, you remember the monk's words. Teeth are the soul's anchor to the body. When they rot, so too does your peace. A bit dramatic, sure, but also not wrong. And yet, despite everything, the pain, the rumors, the lawsuit, you're still here, still chewing, still smiling, crookedly, still making jokes to yourself about plagues, pliers, and powdered frog bones. You've outlasted an infection, a barber, a tribunal, and possibly a demon or two. Whatever happens next, you'll be ready. Or at least, you'll have something minty under your pillow. You're tending your small patch of garden, mostly weeds, a few medicinal herbs, and one very confused beet plant, when a boy runs up, panting, red in the face. Someone's blaming you, he gasps. They say you cursed Maud's teeth. You blink. Maud, the miller's wife? He nods. She says ever since you looked at her wrong last week, 3 teeth have gone black and one just fell out. You close your eyes slowly. You were hoping for a quiet morning, maybe a boiled egg. Instead, you're being accused of witchcraft via eye contact. Welcome to 1372. In a world without microbiology or dental hygiene, someone has to take the blame. And when things go wrong, especially painfully, stinkily wrong, people look not for bacteria, but for bad intentions. If someone's cows stop giving milk, it's a witch. If their crops die, it's a curse. And if their teeth fall out, clearly someone has been thinking bad thoughts in their direction. That someone, apparently, is you. You're not even that interesting. But you did scowl at Maud last week when she took the last of the rye bread and called your bandage face laundry. So yes, maybe there was some stink eye involved. By midday, the whispers have spread. Children won't come near you. Beatrix avoids your gaze. Even old Mags, who once recommended boiled centipede as a leg balm, gives you a wide berth. You're summoned to the town square. There's no official inquisition, mind you. The church hasn't sent anyone. But the village reeve is there, holding a stick like it's both a pointer and a gavel. Maud stands nearby, mouth tightly closed, but with one side visibly sunken, where a molar has clearly made its escape. "She accuses you," the Reeve says, "of summoning rot through malice." You want to laugh. You do not. Instead, you're made to answer. Did you curse her? Did you place anything under her threshold? Did you recite any Latin near her oxen? You shake your head. I can barely recite prayers properly, let alone curses. Still, medieval superstition is sticky stuff. It clings, it spreads, and it likes easy explanations. Historians still argue whether tooth-related curses were ever codified in law or if they were simply local lore gone wild. Some records mention mouth afflictions caused by the evil tongue or gaze of envy. And in more rural areas, these accusations carried real weight. A woman in a nearby region was once drowned in a pond after a merchant lost all his teeth in a single winter. The cause? Her crooked smile. It didn't help that dental pain often appeared without warning. One day you're fine. The next, your jaw is on fire and your breath could fell a night. And when things happen without explanation, people fill in the blanks with magic, sin, or malice. You're asked to prove your innocence by placing your hands in cold water and reciting the Lord's Prayer backward. You manage it, barely. Your tongue still trips over, "Deliver us from evil" in reverse. They also make you touch Maud's cheek. Nothing happens. She winces, but that's because her gum is leaking something green. Very well, the Reeve says. She may be spiteful, but not hexed. The crowd disperses. Maud grumbles. You return home, exhausted. That night, you find a small bundle hanging on your door. Inside, a tooth, clearly human, wrapped in wool with a sprig of rosemary. It's a curse marker. You don't scream. You sigh deeply, like someone who knows full well they're about to have to dig a hole in the yard and bury yet another piece of weird. You burn the wool. You toss the tooth into the fire. It makes a faint popping sound as it cracks. You sprinkle salt over your threshold because, hey, you're not above a little counter-superstition. Tooth-related folklore runs deep. In some villages, people believed you had to bury your baby teeth or rats would steal them and grow human heads. In others, if you burned a lost tooth, it meant your new one would grow in strong. And if someone found your discarded molar and used it in a curse, you could be plagued by ulcers, stuttering, or even, yes, eternal halitosis. You once heard a story of a widow who kept her husband's teeth in a pouch. She said they whispered secrets to her at night. Everyone avoided her after that. Smart people. But curses weren't the only thing teeth were involved in. In certain places, tooth amulets were worn to protect against evil, ward off illness, or grant courage, especially wolf teeth, popular among soldiers and anxious children. You briefly consider making one, just in case. Maybe from that molar you nearly swallowed last month. Instead, you focus on healing. You rub clove oil on your gums, sip sage tea, and avoid looking directly at anyone for fear of further accusations. It's a quiet life, but at least it doesn't involve trial by duck pond. Eventually, the rumors fade. Maud finds someone else to blame, possibly the Reeve's new wife, who wears too much red. You sleep better now. Fewer people knock on your door, fewer accusations, fewer teeth falling out around you like confetti at a cursed wedding. You wake one morning and feel neutral, not pain-free, but stable. And in 1372, that's the equivalent of radiant health. You even smile, carefully. You're leaning on the fence one sunny morning, soaking in the rare warmth like a cat with a mortgage, when you spot something unusual. A merchant's wagon rattling into the village. It's not the wagon itself that catches your attention, but the man riding it. He's dressed in fur-lined robes, wearing a hat so wide it might have its own weather, and he's smiling. And what a smile it is. You squint. Is that gold? Yes, he has teeth, several of them, and some are gleaming like treasure in the sunlight. You're not sure whether to be impressed or deeply offended. As the merchant dismounts and begins loudly announcing exotic goods, spices from the east, amber from the Baltic, salt so pure it'll cleanse your soul, you notice everyone watching his mouth. Even Maud, who still chews with the side of her face like a cow who knows too much, looks mesmerized. You sidle up to Beatrix. He's got teeth. You whisper. She nods. All of them looks like rich teeth. And there it is, the unspoken truth of 1372. Teeth are class. In peasant circles, missing teeth are a fact of life. Everyone loses a few by 40. Most folks don't even notice unless it affects their ability to blow into a jug. But among the upper classes, teeth mean money. The rich don't have better hygiene. They just have better options. They can afford imported cloves, sugar sparingly, and not constantly, soft foods that don't chip enamel, and when a tooth goes bad, they pay someone not to scream while pulling it. Some even have early dentures, crafted from bone, ivory, or in rare cases, the teeth of the dead. Yes, dead people's teeth, often yanked from paupers or battlefield corpses and repurposed for the grins of nobles. Historians still argue whether these teeth were always obtained ethically. Spoiler, probably not. But the practice was real. A French noblewoman once bragged about her peasant pearls, a charming phrase for other people's molars. Back in the village, people begin quietly comparing their own mouths to the merchants. You hear someone mutter, "I still have 4 on top." Someone else says proudly, "My front one's real." The rest are just shy. You, feeling inspired or insulted, check your reflection in a puddle. Crooked, yes. Slightly stained, sure. But not awful. You've got that peasant look. Rustic, authentic, pre-industrial charm. Still, you start noticing a pattern. People with the most missing teeth seem to get spoken over more, ignored, dismissed. Even among villagers, there's a sort of dental pecking order. The guy with the least number of visible teeth is suddenly getting fewer turns stirring the communal stew. Coincidence? Maybe, but maybe not. That night, you think about it too much. You imagine your smile, the way your lips curve, the subtle tilt of your mouth since that abscess last month. You wonder, has your whole face changed? You remember what old Mags once told you. Lose your teeth, lose your voice. You thought it was metaphorical. It wasn't. In some parts of medieval Europe, especially in more fashion-conscious cities, missing teeth became a kind of visual shorthand, a quick way to guess someone's age, wealth, even virtue. Some claimed a toothless woman was loose, or a man with blackened gums had drunk away his god. Not fair, but reality rarely asks for fairness. There's even rumor of a bishop in the South who refused confession to anyone whose breath he found offensive. Tooth decay, he said, was a sign of spiritual decay. That poor sinner never stood a chance. And so, in your small corner of the world, teeth are now more than just tools for eating. Their reputation, status, weapons. You start seeing people smile less, not from sadness, but calculation. show too many gaps? You risk pity, show too many teeth? You're called vain, or a witch, depending on the crowd. And of course, the old ways still persist. The toothless crone remains a feared symbol. Women with few or no teeth are still whispered about as secret sorcerers. People believe their words carry curses. Their gums hold secrets. Their lack of enamel is proof of unnatural knowledge. You think back to Beatrix's aunt, sharp-eyed, quiet, and nearly toothless, who always knew when rain would come and once predicted a pig's birth to the minute. People don't sit too close to her, but they listen. And in contrast, the merchant leaves after 3 days, his shiny teeth still intact, though slightly dulled by whatever passed for stew that week. He waves as he rides out, and for a brief moment, you see someone toss a rock, not to hit him, but just to mark the moment. Rich teeth. Gone. Life settles back into rhythm, bread, weather, small gossip. But now you notice people smile with lips closed. You see young girls press their fingers over their mouths when they laugh. You see boys try to chew with their mouths open, just enough to show off anything that's still rooted. It's a strange thing, isn't it? In a world where everyone hurts, the appearance of health becomes more valuable than health itself. You fall asleep that night chewing mint, pressing your jaw, wondering if your smile says resilient or risky. Either way, you hope it says you're still here. It's a warm day, and you're sitting on a rock by the river, chewing on a twig like a philosopher with gingivitis, not out of boredom, but habit. One of those old chew sticks made from birch that the monks said might refresh the humors of the mouth. You're not sure it does anything besides leave splinters in your molars, but it beats sitting at home worrying about your next dental disaster. You're reflecting on your year with toothache. Well, toothaches, plural. There was the swelling, the pliers, the monk, the abscess, the brief flirtation with death by barber, the almost lawsuit, and that delightful accusation of witchcraft. And yet, here you are, a bit crooked, a bit cautious, but alive. You've come to understand something fundamental. Nobody really escapes the toothache in 1372. Not the merchant with the gold grin, not the miller's wife who blamed you for her molars, not even the monks with their minty poultices and calm, judgmental faces. Everyone is just one roasted nut or one bad winter from crumbling like stale bread. In fact, as you walk back toward the village, you see a young boy crying by the blacksmith's hut. He's clutching his cheek. His mother's trying to soothe him with a lump of cold onion. You know that look. You know what's coming for him. You pause, gently hand her the leftover mastic resin from your pouch and say, "It helps." "A little." She nods, surprised, maybe grateful. And it hits you. You've become a kind of toothache elder. Not a healer, not a barber, not even a rat-tail apothecary. Just someone who's endured it. Someone who knows which herbs numb and which ones sting. Who to avoid when your cheek swells, who to ask for boiled wine, and who to absolutely never let near your jaw with iron tools. Your smile is a little lopsided. It always will be. But in 1372, that's not failure. It's experience. You get back home and sit by the hearth. The fire crackles, sending the smell of pine smoke into the room. You chew slowly, methodically, on a crust of bread softened in broth. You remember when this would have made you scream. Now it's just careful. The door creaks open, and old Mags shuffles in without knocking. She drops a small bundle on your table. "Dried clove and sage," she says. "For next time." Let's hope there's no next time, you say. She cackles. Oh, there's always a next time, but you'll be ready. You realize she's right, because now you know what to do, when to seek help, when to ride it out, when to chew mint, when to run from barbers, and when to say a quiet prayer to Saint Apollonia, just in case she's listening. You lie down that night, staring at the thatched ceiling, and listen to the wind outside. It hums through the slats. You hear the village settle. Dogs bark in the distance. Someone coughs. A child laughs. You breathe in. Outside. Your jaw doesn't hurt tonight. That's all that matters. Because in this world of superstition and herbs, pliers and prayers, mouthfuls of metal and rotting tooth roots, surviving a toothache is a rite of passage, a badge of suffering and stubbornness. And you, crooked smile and all, wear it with pride. So now, dear listener, let the river of that time drift away behind your closed eyes. The buzzing pain, the worried glances, the crude tools and whispered charms, all fading into a gentle hush. You made it through abscesses and ashes, through fear and fever, through a world where comfort was rare, but resilience was every day. Let the firelight of your mind grow softer, flickering low. You've walked the muddy roads of a medieval village. You've stood under the weight of old superstitions and smiled despite the ache. You've found healing in places stranger than dreams, a monk's herb satchel, a widow's recipe, the unexpected quiet after the worst of the hurt has passed. And now your jaw is still. The ache has finally loosened its grip. The world beyond the pain has returned, gentle, cool, and full of breath. With each slow inhale, feel the weight of the past week melt away. The fear, the noise, the clang of iron in the barber's hands, gone. Now there's just the stillness of night, the soft rhythm of your breath, and the small, quiet knowledge that you made it, that you're safe now, that even in 1372, when the world was rough and survival meant persistence more than perfection, you endured. Let that be enough. Let your mind drift. You are resting. You are healing. You are whole in your own beautifully imperfect way. Sleep well